Before we get started, I have a quick favor. I've been self-funding the Finding Genius podcast for 5 years now. I've done over 3,000 episodes. And as you can see on YouTube, we're up over 1 million views on the channel, which is fantastic. The next thing I really want to push on is to get up to 10,000 subscribers. Because once we do, we'll be able to put a donate button and we'll be able to solicit donations to help keep the podcast running and to also get the Finding Genius Foundation moving along. We have a big project studying anxiety, depression, and PTSD and working on a product to help people overcome these problems because I've seen them explode recently after the last 2 years of the whole virus situation. So if you would, please subscribe to the podcast. That would help us tremendously. Give us a thumbs up and check in the description for Buy Me a Coffee. It's about $5. If you could buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. It would help keep the channel going, and I love coffee. Thank you.
Forget frequently asked questions,
common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
with Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius Podcast. My guest today is Tim Christophersen. He's the author of Generation Restoration. He spent some time in the forests of Northern Europe. He is a child in rural Germany, and he followed his grandfather, a forest ranger, on walks amongst the trees. He's done many fishing trips and mushroom hunts, and so that instilled observation of what his later career would be. Just a brief sketch of his bio, but we'll have him talk about the rest. So welcome, Tim. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Pleasure to be here. From your intro, you would never guess that I'm now a vice president at a global technology company. But yeah, I did have a great childhood in nature.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, good. So what are you doing right now for work? And, then we get into your book and everything too.
Yeah. So I lead climate action at Salesforce, global technology company headquartered in San Francisco. And as part of that, my team and I have the privilege to lead our activities for the Trillion Trees Initiative. So we have to conserve and restore, plant an additional 100 million trees by 2030. We're also investing in watershed resilience around our data center and office locations. And we are one of the large purchasers of carbon credits on the voluntary carbon market. So we're heavily invested in nature and climate and water and all that nature has to do with our water resilience. So it's probably a good connection to my book, but it's the book's written in addition to my day job. I just have to mention that here.
So what is I'm sorry, I didn't get it, but what is the point of the book? What's the goal of it?
So the book, Generation Restoration, is about resetting our relationship with nature. I'm working in this field of sustainability for the last 25 years. I started to ask myself the question, why is it that we're not seeming to make a lot of progress on protracted issues like climate change and nature loss or pollution? And if you start to dig into the underlying causes of why we're in this global polycrisis, as some call it, of the environment, you get to underlying questions of how we structure our current economic model around only an extractive relationship with nature. And that's sort of coming to an end, that model, because we have run out of natural capital in a lot of countries and a lot of places. Give you one example. Within my lifetime, since mid-1970s, we lost about 73% of all wildlife populations across the world. So this is one indication, and there are many others, of the end of the road of business as usual, if you will, and having to invent an economy that works better for people, for nature, and for the planet that we live on.
Okay, I mean, what is the focus of the book? To show what's been done or plans to restore, certain habitats, or like what's the goal of it?
The book has 8 chapters. The first looks at our current state of the world, and I call that the 10% world. If you take stock of what we still have of natural diversity and abundance, we've depleted that to a degree where most people don't even know what we once had, because there's something called shifting baseline syndrome in ecology. Basically, the loss of nature happens very fast from a geological perspective, but slow enough for people not to actually remember how much we had 50 years ago, because it happens across generations. But then the book moves on to explain how we can get that wealth back back, how we can get our natural wealth and abundance back within one generation.
Both. I mean, is it someone that, people have extracted it for their wealth? What wealth would a person get from something?
Yeah, when I speak about wealth, I mean our natural heritage and you can think about wealth and capital in different perspectives. Financial capital is certainly one of them, but there's also natural capital. There's social capital, which is sort of the education level of people and how healthy they are and how long they live. And then there's inspirational capital, which my book also deals with in terms of inspiring people back to the natural wealth we once had. Let me give you one example. You live in the mid-US, I think, but if you look at New York City, about 150 years ago, New York City was surrounded by several billion oysters. There were 200,000 acres of oyster reefs across all of what is today New York Harbor, Upper Bay, the Hudson River estuary.
There's even a place called Oyster Bay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. New York exported oysters to France, Germany, England. New Yorkers ate them all the time. So it was one of the defining natural infrastructure elements of the city. It was a good part of the city's natural wealth. What happened then is oysters were overharvested, but mostly the water got so polluted that they couldn't live there anymore. But people today would have forgotten that. Most New Yorkers wouldn't even know, even though there is a project called the Billion Oyster Project that's trying to bring oysters back to New York. But if you think what natural wealth at that level would do for the city, for example, protected from super storms like Sandy, the next of which is probably on its way in a few years. And if we rebuild nature at that infrastructure level, we would be much better off in economic terms, but also in terms of mental and physical well-being of the people, because the waters of New York Harbor would be crystal clear. They would be filtered once a day by these massive oyster reefs. New York could once again harvest and sell oysters. It would be a massive tourist attraction.
Why don't cities, I don't know, maybe they do this. Why don't cities like New York carve up, not physically, but just on a map, areas of the water and then sell the rights to, put oyster beds there and farm the oysters, and they have to, X% has to stay in New York and then Y% can be exported and all that. Why doesn't the city kind of monetize and privatize it that way?
Well, it's a very good question. There's several answers to that. One is that industry simply doesn't exist because we're not used to seeing nature in that way. I think the industry of reinvesting in nature and not just taking from nature is starting now in, for example, the voluntary carbon market. I just returned from Brazil visiting the largest reforestation project in the Amazon. It's about 20,000 hectares, or it's about 100,000 acres they now have under management, where they're putting trees back that have been clear-cut, and they're reforesting this with native Amazonian species. But that industrial scale repair of nature does not exist as an industry. There's basically no companies you could call and say, hey, can you rebuild 3 billion oysters around New York City? No, nobody does that at the moment. But that's exactly the kind of industry we need. So that's partly what my book is about, that we need to be able to say, what is the value that we could create here? Who would benefit? Who could pay for the initial costs? And then some of that will be public works projects. Like New York also had to save and restore a lot of forests in the Catskills and elsewhere to have drinking water. But some of it will also be private investment.
In New York especially is, for Battery Park, they did infill and extended the size of Manhattan. And then there's also a park, I forget where it is, I walked it. It's like a really long, narrow strip now where you can bike and walk and planters. The highlights. I mean, New York is like one of the most, at least to me in the U.S., one of the most avant-garde cities that's doing stuff like that,
Yeah, and around the world, there are cities that are even more avant-garde. If you look what happened in Paris in the last 10 years, where the entire city was completely re-greened and a lot of investments have been made into that nature as green infrastructure. I think once people see what is possible, when you see nature not just as something we take for granted and until it's gone, but reinvest in nature, everybody is in favor of that because it's really a win-win-win for the economy, for public health, for a city's property values. Or if you go into agriculture, not necessarily, this can happen in all ecosystems, and you regenerate the soil's capacity to produce food. Of course, you raise the value of your land. So this makes sense on many levels. And it's surprising, back to your original question, why is this not happening? It's surprising that it's not happening because it makes so much sense. But this is exactly what the book is about. It's a blueprint for how to repair nature at planetary scale and the trillion-dollar industry we would need to build to do that across the world in all key countries for key habitats.
Well, how do you know what to do? Like, are you taking this from successful case studies in other cities, or where's the information coming from on how to do this?
Fortunately, we have decades of experience on small scale and pilot scale level. There are very few large scale restoration projects, but there are a few at the level of entire landscapes and sometimes entire nations. And we can look back in history. If you think, for example, the country of Costa Rica in the 1980s was down to their low 20s of forest cover. All the other forest has disappeared. And then within 30 years, till the mid 80s, they rebuilt the forest cover back to over 50%. And in the same time, Costa Rica increased their GDP significantly and is now, as you know, an ecotourism haven. So it's possible to rebuild nature at even a nationwide scale and benefit. But that example is rare. There are not many other countries who've yet managed to do that, even though it would be feasible and possible everywhere. Worked on this for 25 years. So
where do these projects tend to get stuck? Like, are they never even proposed, or like what happens to them?
What you need is a good collaboration between the public and the private sector, and that's very rare because I think those two sectors, having myself worked for the United Nations for 15 years and now for a Fortune 100 company, there's a lot of misunderstandings between the public and the private sector. So they often get stuck in policy and regulation, and they often get stuck in private capital being not used to nature as an asset class in the sense of investable asset classes like real estate or infrastructure. But I think that is all changing, and we see a lot of influx of private money now into these types of nature restoration projects. Went increased 11-fold in the past 4 years to around 100 billion per year, which is, I think, about 10% of what we need globally, which will be about $1 trillion per year. But that is within reach once we realize that we need nature as critical infrastructure for basically everything we eat, we drink, we build our homes and cities with. So I think this is coming, and the book is a blueprint for how to unfold that global restoration boom.
Again, in New York itself, you got Central Park, which is huge and beautiful. And it's weird when you're in Central Park and you look out at the buildings in the city. It's like another world, It's really cool. But again, New York has done at least several times, these kind of projects, which I think is very inspirational,
Yeah, they certainly have done a lot of things right. Not to say that they couldn't do more, because the Billion Oysters project, for example, is run on a shoestring budget. If the city would just say, well, we pick up some money because we want to be protected from the next storm surges and we need to rebuild these oyster reefs at massive scale, we could accelerate these kinds of projects massively. But for that, we need the majority of New Yorkers to understand what they could get back and what they could gain from restoring nature at that scale. And I mean, you asked, how do we know that this would work? There's tens of thousands of restoration experts around the world who know how to do this. I think if we get the right mix of political will, public works, infrastructure projects, private finance, and the technology and expertise together, we can absolutely increase restoration to planetary scale. And AI obviously can also help as one of the new tools that we can deploy for building that kind of understanding of what ecology really means and how important it is to have a functioning ecosystem that underpins civilization's needs.
Well, I had an idea. I don't know if this is quite a fancy stuff, but what if a city like New York said, like, in order to live here once a year, we need you to do some public works for about 4 hours. You'll be given food or something, or you'll be paid an amount. And if you're disabled, we understand. You can't do this or that. But what if they got, like it says, about 8 million people? What if they got 1% a weekend to do something, to clean up the city, to paint stuff, to fix stuff, to move stuff, whatever it is? What if they got less than 1%, way less? What if they got 10,000 people a weekend, for 30, 40 weeks out of the year, besides winter to like do these public works projects? Again, it was a requirement.
I think that's a phenomenal idea, and I hope any New Yorker, any New York decision makers are listening, because there are other countries and cities that have done that around the world. In South Korea, for example, the country was almost completely deforested after the Second World War and after the Korean War, and nowadays they're back to 70% forest cover. And over many years, this was part of everybody's routine, that they had to commit and provide some support for community projects. Every Saturday or one day a week, they had to spend some of their time to rebuild nature, rebuild infrastructure, rebuild villages. So sure, there are good models for that around the world. In the case of New York, it would actually be fun to do, because you actually can go out there and restore these oyster beds. You could also, of course, do other restoration work in the wider area around New York City. You could help clean the shorelines and the coastal ecosystems. I think there would be a lot of benefits for that kind of community engagement. So I hope this is some of the things that cities and governments in future will be doing more of, because we definitely need to engage people more, to spend more time with nature and reconnect with nature.
Yeah. Well, so does the book propose ideas like this, or for people that are interested, how hard is it to get a project like this going? Like, how many people do you need involved to be to get critical mass? Do you need elected officials, like multiple ones, to be on board, or you're going to get nowhere at the bureaucratic level? Like, what's involved in order to do something like this?
Well, the beautiful thing about ecosystem restoration is that it works at almost any scale. Obviously, the larger the better, but even if you just have a backyard and you want to know how you can rebuild nature's functionality in your backyard, you can go onto online platforms like restore.eco, which is sort of like the LinkedIn of ecosystem restoration. It's restore without an E at the end, and then ECO. So there's now about 300,000 projects around the world, and you can just go on there. You can draw a polygon of your backyard. You say, this is now Richard Jacobs' restoration project. And then you can invite your neighbors. You can invite them to collaborate, see what you're doing in your backyard, and encourage them to do the same. And that can grow into a community-driven project, or you can start at a very different level. The country of Costa Rica, going back to that example, they've now uploaded all of their publicly funded restoration projects. They're paying hundreds of thousands of landowners for restoration. They've uploaded all of their project profiles onto that platform. So this is happening at all levels, and you can engage at any level. I think it's important to find out what is the right level for you. And in the book, I speak about these 3 levels of ecological literacy. Basically, do you know where your food comes from? How does it get to your plate? Does it come from regenerative agriculture? Where does your water come from? How does it get to your tap? And then what kind of species do you share your city, your community, your country with? And what does nature do for you where you live? So these basic ecological literacy parameters are also something I talk people through in the book, how you can find that out, how you can engage through your food, through the water that you drink, with the ecosystems that sustain you. And by following that path, you will definitely find one or more restoration projects near you that are already happening.
Okay, then you get participate in them. That's really cool. So pretty much you think wherever you live in the United States, I don't know about the world, but I guess wherever you live in the world, there should be something you can contribute to.
Well, there's definitely projects in every country on that platform, but some of them are few and far between. So we definitely need more of them. And especially, obviously, in cities, it's sometimes difficult for people to really engage with nature. Talking to friends who live in Paris or in London, if they want to participate in community garden projects, for example, there are long wait lists. People love to engage with that kind of nature management and restoring nature, having community gardens in cities. I think there's a huge opportunity for everybody to engage. It starts, though, with that ecological literacy and knowing where and how you depend on nature, because we all do, but most of us don't realize or don't take time to think about it and have forgotten that dependence. And spending time with nature and being in nature and listening to nature is the key message of the book.
Okay. How long has it been out?
It came out last month, and it was the #1 new release for green business books on Amazon. I have no idea actually what that means, but it sounds good. So I think it's doing well. And I was fortunate enough to have the foreword by Jane Goodall, who sadly passed away in 2 weeks before the book was released. But she wrote the foreword. And if you've listened to Jane Goodall's message, she was always somebody who's very hopeful about the state of the planet and how we could all engage and reconnect with the natural world. So that's a very powerful opening to the book, and it's available on Amazon and all key platforms, and of course in your local bookstore around the corner, which people also again more and more seem to frequent. Books are actually surprisingly in fashion, given that we all seem to be so digitized these days.
Well, yeah, that's another discussion about the quality of the content and everything, analog versus digital. But there's even a book called Revenge of the Analog by David Sachs, where he gave examples of people preferably playing board games again and listening to records and doing analog activities, and that it was good.
Yeah, it's nothing more analog than nature. So if you want to just take a walk without your cell phone and immerse yourself in nature, there are actually a lot of health benefits from that. There's a study that if you spend 120 minutes or more per week in nature, it will lower your cholesterol level, it will balance your blood pressure, lower your stress and anxiety levels, better for your sleep patterns. So if for no other reason, spend more time in nature and with nature for health benefits. But I think there's also a lot of other benefits we can gain from reconnecting with nature and repairing that relationship, which I mean quite literal when I talk of a relationship with nature, because if you're in a relationship where one side only ever takes, never gives anything, that's not a relationship that can be maintained. It's a toxic relationship that has to end in some form or another. That's the relationship we're in with nature right now. So we have to come back to a relationship where we're more taking and giving, where it's a more reciprocal relationship.
So what's the best way for people to, they can start with your book? It's available everywhere, I'm sure, but how can they, just reiterate, how can they find out about projects around them and join one if they wish? Where's a good central repository of them again?
Yeah, so in the book, Generation Restoration, there's a list of online platforms where you can find out how to engage. One of them is Restore.eco. The other one is Patagonia Action Works is one that I like. There are also platforms that are focused more on getting your hands dirty, literally, when you work in organic agriculture. There's a platform I like called Worldwide Opportunities on Organic Farms, where you can basically, for your holidays or for longer periods, volunteer on organic farms for free accommodation and board, and you can learn how to restore nature on a farm if you want to go to that length. If you are more inclined to do something in your neighborhood, there are, of course, organizations that are specialized in nature conservation and in restoration across the United States and also in most other countries. So Restore is a good place to start, and there's a whole list in my book of platforms that can guide you to where there are projects near you.
Okay. Last question. Has anyone thought of turning this on its head? Instead of telling people, we've been abusing nature and taking from it and all that stuff, what if you deliberately go forward with a selfish, self-serving premise that it also benefits other people? I have this empty lot in a neighborhood and we want to make it into a community park. So anyone that'll donate X amount of time and Y amount of money, you'll get a small ownership of that park, let's say in perpetuity, and I think it gives you a tax write-off or maybe gives you special access because you're a member. So you're doing this for a public good, but you're also getting a private benefit, even if small.
That's a brilliant idea. There are models like that where people benefit from those community spaces, because restoration of nature is not only about nature, it's about restoring a sense of community and purpose. It's about restoring us as well. And I think that project that you described would do both. It would restore a sense of community and it would restore biodiversity and some soil health, and it would allow probably more rainwater to filter into the ground instead of washing away. So I think that's a great idea. And for a TED Talk, I would love to do a TED Talk. I haven't done one yet, but there are some on the topic, both TED and TEDx talks on restoration of nature at scale. My friend Tom Crowther has done one, I think, who's the founder of Restore. But yeah, maybe at some point I'll do one about the book. The book's just come out, so it's early days. But thank you for having me on your podcast, Richard. It's much appreciated.
Yeah, no, thank you so much.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at FindingGeniusPodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.